Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive tactical earthquake that literally changed football forever. You know, the real revolution? It wasn't the loudest. It was quietly engineered by two absolutely brilliant guys from Scandinavia, Henrik Larsson and Brian Laudrup. They quietly but completely dismantled the 1990s football landscape to build the modern forward we know today. Okay, let's dive into this. To really get the magnitude of this shift, you've got to picture the tactical landscape of the late 80s and early 90s. Right in the middle of the Premier League's massive boom and the sheer dominance of Italy's Serie A, the bruising target man archetype was absolute king. I mean, if you were a number 9 back then, your job was basically to be a battering ram. You stood with your back to the goal, relied on sheer physical presence, won those brutal aerial battles, and basically just intimidated defenders. But the game was shifting, right? As teams started moving toward these faster pressing systems, that heavy, static forward actually became a huge liability. The game suddenly screamed out for a player who was fluid, fast, and cerebral. Someone with the pace of a winger, but the cold-blooded composure of a striker. Which brings us to this absolutely brilliant metaphor from our source material that perfectly captures the core philosophy these guys introduced. Football as a game of chess played at a sprint. Just think about that for a second. The Scandi Wave fundamentally shifted both the physical and the psychological requirements of attacking. It wasn't just a physical wrestling match in the penalty box anymore. No, it became a rapid, high-stakes cognitive contest. It was all about blending raw athleticism with this sublime technical grace, basically outthinking your opponent while moving at absolute top speed. So, let's look at the first architect of this movement, Brian Laudrup. Honestly, he's probably the most underrated genius of the 1990s. While his famous brother Michael was known as the cerebral conductor of a team, Brian, he was this exhilarating, completely unpredictable solo violinist. He was famous for his sheer elegance on the ball and, well, let's be honest, maybe a slight reluctance to track back and actually defend. But when he arrived in Scotland to join Rangers back in 1994, he sent absolute shockwaves through the British game. The level of technical sophistication he brought was just something defenders hadn't ever seen from an attacker. He wasn't a traditional striker, and he flat out refused to play like one. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what he did. He completely dismantled defensive structures by exploiting the half spaces. That's that dangerous, kind of ambiguous corridor right between the fullback and the center back. See, Laudrup didn't just stand in a static position waiting for a cross. He actively drifted right into these exact zones. And at a time when rigid man marking was the absolute default defensive strategy, his movement became an existential threat. It completely flipped the script. By refusing to stay where he was supposed to be, he ripped defensive structures apart, dragging defenders totally out of their designated zones and actively dictating where the play should go. So what Laudrup essentially invented here was the dribbling playmaker. By using a remarkably low center of gravity and just devastating close control, he could completely bypass those physical confrontations we talked about earlier. He proved, once and for all, that you didn't need to be a 6'4" physical target to be effective. Instead, he acted as this crucial release valve for his entire team. Just imagine this. He could take a desperate, messy defensive clearance and using that incredible control transform it into a lethal counterattack in 3 seconds flat. Managers figured out pretty quickly that if you gave a creative player like Laudrup the license to roam, the opposition's entire structural integrity would eventually just crumble trying to track him. Now, if Laudrup was the artist painting outside the lines, Henrik Larsson was the complete package. He was literally the ultimate prototype for the 21st century forward. When Larsson signed for Celtic in 1997, rocking those iconic dreadlocks, he was a bit raw, sure, but he had this innate, highly developed understanding of space that was incredibly rare for the time. He brought this intense duality to the game that literally forced defenders to completely rethink their entire approach. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is comparing these two side by side. It really reveals how perfectly they complemented each other to form this overarching Scandi philosophy. You've got Laudrup, the unpredictable artist, super focused on dribbling and creation. And then you have Larsson, the prototype, the complete package. Larsson took the relentless work ethic of a tireless midfielder. You'd often see him tracking back to initiate play, and combined it with the instinctual lethality of a pure goal scorer. He wasn't the biggest guy out there either, but his movement inside the box, it was an absolute masterclass in deception. He used feints, clever body positioning, and this uncanny ability to anticipate deflections to quite literally create space out of thin air. Because of this incredibly unique skill set, Larsson managed to successfully bridge the massive tactical gap between the traditional target man and what we now call the false nine. You know, a forward who intentionally drops deep into the midfield to pull defenders completely out of position. This was his true evolution of the striker role. I mean, he was phenomenally lethal in the air, arguably one of the best headers of the ball in modern history, but he was just as comfortable dropping deep to link up play or drifting out wide to exploit his pace. Put yourself in the shoes of a 90s defender facing Larsen. It was a nightmare. He forced you into an impossible choice. Do you follow him out of the box and completely vacate the danger zone, or do you stay put and let him entirely dictate the tempo of the game? It was a lose-lose situation, for sure. History so often only records the loudest players, right? The ones with the flashiest personalities, the biggest egos, or those astronomical price tags. But the truest tactical revolutions in football, they are almost always quiet. Henrik Larsson and Brian Laudrup were not loud. They were precise, deeply professional, and just devastatingly effective. They played with this intense cerebral energy. Their revolution didn't happen with screaming matches on the pitch. No, it happened in the subtle shifts of a starting position, or the specific, calculated way a forward turned their body to receive a pass in training. And the blueprint they left behind is visible in almost every single match today. First up, versatility became a strict prerequisite. The one-dimensional striker, that started to completely fade out. Managers now demanded forwards who could defend, recycle possession, and seamlessly swap places with wingers. Because of this, intelligence officially trumped raw strength. Speed of thought, literally identifying a gap before it even opened, became infinitely more valuable than just out-muscling a center back. Ultimately, this culmination of mobility and mind led directly to the rise of the complete forward. Just look at the modern legends of the game: Thierry Henry, Robin van Persie, Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Every single one of them shares tactical DNA with the path paved by Larsen and Laudrup. These successors took those core Scandi lessons, mobility, pristine ball control, hyperspatial awareness, and they scaled them up for the modern era. When we watch forwards today who are expected to score, assist, press, and link play all at exactly the same time, we are watching the direct echoes of the Scandi Wave. They taught the world that the goal wasn't just to beat the man marking you, it was to beat the entire defensive structure by being smarter and faster. They changed the game not by shouting over it, but by showing everyone exactly how it should be played. Given the massive, undeniable impact these two had on the evolution of the modern forward, I want you to look at the landscape of football today. Take a look at your favorite team this weekend, watch the movement of their forwards, and ask yourself this: who is the truest spiritual successor to this Scandi philosophy of blending supreme intelligence with lethal versatility?